The desert air was colder than I had expected. By the time the driver dropped me at my uncle's house, night had already draped itself over the village. The silence pressed in thick, broken only by the distant cry of a dog and the faint whistling of the wind through the date palms. My uncle wasn't home. He had warned me over the phone, business in the city, he said, maybe 2 or 3 days. But he reassured me I wouldn't be left alone. The Sheikh will keep an eye on you, he'd added, as though that were all the explanation I needed. I had heard the name before. Sheikh Karim. To me, it sounded more like a title than a person, like some figure out of a story, one of those men who lived closer to the desert than the world. My uncle spoke of him with a reverence I didn't quite understand. When the heavy wooden door opened that evening, I finally understood why. He stood there in the lamplight, tall and composed, his robe gathered neatly at the waist. His beard was silver, streaked with black, and his eyes, dark, steady, met mine with a stillness that startled me. He wasn't what I expected. He wasn't fragile or bent by age. If anything, he looked as though time had given him a kind of strength I couldn't name. "You are my friend's nephew," he said, his voice low, deep, carrying years of weight. "Come inside. The night grows cold." I stepped in, setting my bag against the wall. The house smelled faintly of cardamom and wood smoke. He moved with a quiet grace, pouring water into a basin, gesturing for me to wash, then leading me to the table where dinner was already waiting. We ate together in silence at first, the kind that wasn't uncomfortable, just deliberate. I kept stealing glances at him, curious. His hands were large, veined, steady as he tore the bread. His eyes, though, lingered on me in a way I couldn't quite interpret. Not judgment. Not simple curiosity. Something quieter. Something that made my chest feel strange. He asked about my studies, my life in the city, whether I ever returned to the village. I answered politely, aware of how intently he listened. When the meal was done, he lit a lantern and led me to the terrace. Outside, the desert stretched endless and black, and the stars, God, the stars, looked like they had been scattered by hand across the sky. "You're not used to this kind of silence," he said, leaning against the stone railing. I shook my head. "The city never stops talking." He gave a soft laugh, a sound that caught me off guard. "The desert speaks too. But you have to learn to listen." I didn't know how to answer that, so I just looked at him. The light caught his profile, carving shadows along his face. There was a stillness to him, but not the kind that comes from emptiness. His stillness felt full. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The silence between us wasn't empty anymore. It was heavy, charged like the air before rain. When he finally turned his gaze back to me, my breath faltered. His eyes didn't move quickly past mine the way most people's did. He looked straight into me and stayed there, unflinching, like he saw something I hadn't offered yet. Something stirred in my chest. A warmth. A question I couldn't shape. I glanced away, pretending to study the stars, but I could still feel it, that look resting on me like a hand that lingered too long. In that moment, I realized this night wouldn't be ordinary. Something had already shifted, something neither of us had spoken, but both of us had felt. The way he looked at me, it was more than a glance. It was the beginning of something I couldn't name. The storm came without warning. One moment the desert was calm, the stars crisp and countless above us, and the next a wall of wind rolled in, thick with sand. The lamps along the terrace flickered violently before the Sheikh hurried me inside, closing the heavy wooden door against the howling gusts. The house trembled with each surge of wind. My guest room, one of the smaller ones at the back, was the first to suffer. The shutters banged wildly against the walls, dust poured through the cracks, and the window panes rattled like they might splinter. I tried to wrestle the shutters closed, my arms straining against the force of the storm, but it was useless. Behind me, his voice filled the room. "You'll never find rest here tonight." I turned breathless. "I'll be fine." He shook his head, stepping toward me. His hand, broad and steady, came to rest on my shoulder. "Come. My room is better sheltered." The firmness in his tone left no space for argument. I followed him down the dim hallway, the air thick with dust and the muffled roar of the storm pressing at the walls. When we reached his room, I froze. It was simple but larger, with thick curtains drawn tight over the windows. The air inside was calm, untouched by the chaos outside. A single brass lamp cast a warm glow, and in the center stood one wide bed, neatly laid with heavy blankets. I hesitated in the doorway. I can take the floor." His expression softened, though the command in his voice remained. "Nonsense. There is space enough." And that was that. He moved to one side of the bed and sat, the mattress sinking beneath his weight. I swallowed hard and forced my feet forward, setting my bag down and slipping awkwardly onto the other side. The silence was deafening at first. I lay stiff, my body hyper-aware of his presence beside me. The mattress dipped toward him. The faint warmth of his body seeped across the small space between us. He lay on his back, one arm resting behind his head, eyes closed, or at least I thought so. I turned toward the ceiling, but every nerve in me felt alive, stretched taut. Minutes passed. Maybe longer. And then, "Are you uncomfortable?" His voice was quiet, but it startled me all the same. I exhaled too quickly. "No, just not used to this." His lips curved into a faint smile. "Neither am I." I rolled slightly onto my side, drawn against my will to look at him. His eyes were open now, gazing upward, unfocused. In the dim light, his face seemed both worn and strong, carved with lines that spoke of years lived deeply. Another gust of wind rattled the house and I flinched. His hand, almost instinctively, brushed against mine where it rested on the blanket. Just a touch, fleeting but enough to make my chest tighten. I told myself it was nothing. A gesture of reassurance. A small kindness. But when the storm moved on, when the wind fell to a distant murmur, that touch lingered in my skin like fire. Neither of us spoke about it. He withdrew his hand slowly as though uncertain, and turned his gaze back to the ceiling. I mirrored him, but sleep wouldn't come. My heart raced too fast, my mind too loud. I listened to the rhythm of his breathing, steady, deliberate. I wanted to believe he had already drifted off. But I could feel it, the way you can feel the weight of eyes on you in the dark. He wasn't asleep. And neither was I. That night, the storm might have forced us into the same room, the same bed. But the silence that followed, it wasn't accidental. It was too close to be nothing. The storm passed, but the silence it left behind was louder than the wind. I lay there on my side, staring into the darkness, my back stiff against the mattress. His breathing was steady, deliberate, but not the kind that belonged to sleep. He was awake. I knew it. I turned slowly, cautiously, until I could see him. His eyes were open, reflecting the faint amber glow of the dying lamp. He didn't look surprised to find me watching him. He didn't look away. "You're not at ease," he said quietly, his voice like gravel softened by years. I swallowed, my throat tight. "I don't usually share space." He gave the smallest nod. "Nor do I. But tonight, it doesn't feel wrong." His words sank into me, heavy and strange. I wanted to answer, but my chest felt too full, my thoughts tangled. I turned onto my back, staring up at the ceiling. He followed my movement with his eyes, and I could feel it. His gaze resting on me like a hand that lingered too long. Minutes stretched, or maybe it was hours. The silence wasn't empty anymore. It carried a weight neither of us dared to name. Every shift of the blanket, every breath between us, felt like a word unspoken. Out of nowhere, his voice broke through again. "You remind me of myself, before the years hardened me." I turned my head, startled by the rawness in his tone. His face was turned slightly away, as though the words had slipped out against his will. "What do you mean?" I asked softly. His eyes flicked back to mine. For a long moment he didn't answer. Then finally he said, "I was not always this man you see. There was a time I was restless, searching, believing life would unfold in ways it never did." The honesty in his voice left me breathless. I wanted to press further, to ask what he had lost, what he still longed for, but something held me back. Maybe fear. Maybe respect. So instead I asked, "Do you ever feel lonely?" The question lingered in the air like smoke. He turned fully toward me now, his expression unreadable. His chest rose with a deep breath before he let it out slowly. "More often than I admit." His words landed inside me like a stone in water, rippling outward, touching something hidden in me. I wanted to tell him that I knew that feeling too, that despite my youth, despite the noise of the city and the people always around me, I had carried the same loneliness like a shadow. But I didn't say it aloud. I didn't have to. The silence said it for me. For a long while we just looked at each other. The distance between us on the bed felt smaller now, like the storm had drawn us into some space neither of us had meant to step into. His eyes softened, almost imperceptibly. "You listen," he said, his voice low, almost tender. "Most people do not." I wanted to answer, but my throat refused. All I could manage was a small nod. He smiled faintly at that, a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes but still warmed me. And then he closed them as though retreating before he gave away more. I rolled onto my side again, facing him in the dim light. I didn't close my eyes. I couldn't. The silence between us wasn't empty anymore. It was alive. Something had shifted. Not in what we said. Not in what we did. but in what we both knew and could no longer deny. There was something in the silence. And it was changing everything. The house was still. The storm had passed hours ago, leaving only the quiet hum of the desert night. But inside me nothing was calm. My chest ached with the weight of everything unspoken, the pull of something I didn't yet have the courage to name. I don't know what compelled me, but at some point my hand moved, hesitant, uncertain, and came to rest lightly against his forearm. It was meant to be brief. Just a small gesture of reassurance, a silent answer to the loneliness he had admitted to. But I didn't pull away. Neither did he. Instead, his eyes opened slowly, meeting mine in the dim light. He didn't speak. He didn't move, except for his hand, which shifted ever so slightly, covering mine. His palm was warm, rough, steady. His thumb traced once across the back of my hand, so subtly it might have been imagined. But it wasn't. I felt every second of it. The world shrank to that single point of contact. The air thickened, my heartbeat thundered in my chest, and my breath faltered. I panicked then, retreating quickly, pulling my hand back as though the touch had burned me. I'm sorry, I whispered, my voice breaking. But before my hand could slip away entirely, he caught it again. Not forcefully. Not demanding. Just a gentle hold, grounding me, stopping me from fleeing. Don't, he said softly. That single word, quiet, steady, carrying more weight than anything else he had said all night, froze me where I was. I looked at him wide-eyed and saw something in his face I hadn't expected. Not amusement. Not confusion. But vulnerability. As though he too had crossed into a place he didn't plan to reach, and now he was asking me not to abandon him there. My throat tightened. I couldn't find words. All I could do was let my hand stay where it was, caught gently beneath his. Neither of us moved after that. Neither of us dared to. The silence pressed in around us again, but this time it wasn't heavy. It was alive, humming with a quiet rhythm that felt almost sacred. At some point, his hand shifted slightly, our fingers brushing, then settling together more naturally. It was such a small thing. So simple. But it felt like an entire world had shifted. I closed my eyes, not because I wanted to escape, but because I wanted to hold on to the feeling without letting it overwhelm me. Time blurred. I don't know how long we stayed like that, hands resting together between us, the warmth of his skin seeping into mine. My body finally eased, my breathing slowing, as though that single touch had anchored me in ways I hadn't realized I needed. Sleep came eventually, though lightly. Each time I stirred, half dreaming, I found his hand still there, steady against mine. And each time the tension inside me unraveled just a little more. When dawn's pale light slipped through the curtains, I woke fully. My first thought was that it had all been some strange dream. But then I felt it, his hand still resting on mine, unbroken through the night. I turned my head. He was awake, watching me quietly. His expression unreadable, but his eyes carried everything I had felt. Neither of us spoke. Neither of us needed to. The touch hadn't left. It had stayed. And it had already changed everything. The first rays of dawn crept through the curtains, pale and quiet, washing the room in a soft golden haze. I lay still, hardly daring to move. His hand was still over mine, steady, as though the night had not been broken at all. I turned my head slightly. He was awake. His gaze was on me, not heavy, not demanding, just there, present, as if he had been watching me long before my eyes opened. For a long time neither of us spoke. The silence had grown familiar by now, but this morning it felt different, thicker, harder to breathe through. Something needed to be said, and I realized with a strange clarity that it had to come from me. "It doesn't feel like nothing," I whispered. The words slipped out before I could stop them. My voice trembled, fragile, like it might shatter in the air between us. His breath caught, and I saw his chest rise and fall once before he turned more fully toward me. His eyes searched mine, steady, unflinching. "No," he said quietly. "It doesn't." The truth of it struck me harder than I expected. I felt tears prick at the corners of my eyes, though I didn't know why. Maybe relief. Maybe fear. Maybe both. I sat up, pulling the blanket slightly around my shoulders, my hands twisting in the fabric. "I don't understand what this is," I admitted. My voice cracked on the last word. He sat up too, mirroring me, his face solemn but gentle. "Neither do I," he confessed. There was no hesitation in his tone, no attempt to soften the truth. "But I know it is not nothing." The space between us felt fragile, delicate, as if any sudden movement might break whatever thread held us together. He lifted a hand slowly, hesitantly, as though asking permission without words. And when his fingers brushed my cheek, feather-light, I didn't pull away. The touch was simple, but it undid me completely. My chest tightened, my breath faltered, and the tears I had been holding back slipped free. "Why does it feel like this?" I whispered, almost to myself. His thumb brushed once across my skin, wiping away a tear. His eyes softened, heavy with something I couldn't name. "Because it is real," he said. "And real things are rarely simple." My body trembled, but not with fear anymore. I leaned forward slightly, instinctively, until my forehead rested against his chest. His arm came around me without hesitation, pulling me close, holding me as though he had been waiting for this too. The steady beat of his heart pressed against my ear, grounding me. I closed my eyes and let myself breathe him in, the faint scent of cardamom and the desert air still clinging to him. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. The silence we shared now was not empty, not confusing. It was a shelter, a place where we could both admit what we could not say aloud. I let my hand rest lightly against his chest, feeling the steady rhythm of his heart. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel alone. For the first time, I let myself wonder, what if this is real? The sun had risen fully now, painting the room in warm gold. The storm was only a memory, but its mark lingered, not in the house, not in the desert, but in me. In us. We stayed as we were for a long time, his arm wrapped around me, my forehead against his chest. His breathing was slow, steady, and for once mine began to match it. There was no rush to move, no urgency to explain. Eventually I lifted my head. His hand fell gently to my shoulder, his eyes meeting mine with a softness that made my chest ache. He studied me as though I were something fragile, something unexpected. "You are young," he said at last, his voice low but almost teasing. "You should not waste your nights sitting with an old man." I couldn't help it, I laughed, shaky but real. Maybe I wasn't waiting for someone my age. For the first time since I'd met him, he truly laughed. It was low, rich, and startled, as though it had been years since he'd let the sound escape. The lines at the corners of his eyes deepened, and something in the heaviness between us lifted, just a little. We sat back, still close, but now the silence felt easier, lighter. Like it had shifted from something heavy to something sacred. The morning passed quietly. We talked, but not about what had happened, not about what it meant. Instead, we spoke of everything else. His youth, the places he had traveled when he was restless and searching. The people he had known, the lessons he had carried. And he asked me questions too, ones no one else ever asked. About my studies, yes, but more than that, about what I wanted, what I feared, what I carried quietly when no one was looking. I found myself answering honestly, without the walls I usually kept. Something about him pulled truth out of me as though it had been waiting all along for someone who would listen. At one point, the warmth of the sun and the weight of the night's sleeplessness made me drowsy. I shifted, leaning slightly against him, testing if it would be welcome. He didn't move away. Instead, his arm rested lightly around my shoulders, natural and unforced. I let my head rest there fully, and he adjusted the blanket around us without a word. The gesture was small, but it made my throat tighten. We sat like that for a long while, the desert quiet outside, the world holding still. My eyes closed without meaning to, and for the first time in months, maybe years, I felt safe enough to drift. Just before sleep pulled me under, I felt it. His lips pressing gently against the top of my hair. So soft, so fleeting, I might have thought I dreamed it. But I hadn't. The warmth of it lingered, threading through me, filling spaces I hadn't known were empty. When I stirred awake again, the room was brighter, and he was still there beside me as though he hadn't moved. I lifted my head, blinking at him. He smiled faintly, the kind of smile that held back more than it revealed. "You slept," he said softly. "Only because you stayed," I murmured before I could think better of it. His smile deepened, and he looked away as though he needed the window to hold his gaze for him. And I realized then, with a sudden, startling clarity, I had been waiting for this. Not him, not specifically. But this closeness, this safety, this kind of bond that asked for nothing and yet gave everything. I hadn't known I was waiting until it was here. And now that it was, I couldn't imagine not having it. By the time the sun was high, the storm felt like a dream the desert had already forgotten. The air outside shimmered with heat, the sand stretched endless and golden, and the world was quiet again. But I wasn't the same. We moved to the terrace together, carrying 2 cups of tea. He poured carefully, his hand steady despite the years. The steam curled into the morning light, and for a while, we simply sat side by side, looking out over the endless horizon. Neither of us mentioned the night. Neither of us asked what it meant. But the silence was no longer the kind that weighed heavy on my chest. It was something we shared now, something full. At one point as I reached for my cup, his hand brushed mine. It could have been accidental. It wasn't. His fingers lingered just a moment, curling slightly until they laced with mine. Natural. Quiet. As though we had been doing it for years. I didn't pull away. I didn't want to. We spoke of simple things as the morning wore on. He told me stories of my uncle when they were young, mischief in the village, long rides across the dunes, laughter that carried until dawn. I laughed with him, imagining the man I knew in a way I had never seen before. He listened when I spoke too, about the city, about my studies, about the feeling that I was drifting without anchor. He never interrupted, never dismissed. He only listened, and when he finally spoke, his words came with a kind of clarity that settled deep inside me. "You think you are lost," he said, his voice low, thoughtful. "But sometimes what feels like wandering is only waiting. The desert waits. The sky waits. Perhaps we must too." I looked at him then, and the truth of it struck me. He wasn't only speaking of me. The hours slipped by easily, without measure. For the first time I didn't feel restless. For the first time I didn't want to rush ahead, didn't want to define what this was, didn't want to name it. Being there beside him was enough. Eventually, though, reality returned. The driver would come for me. My uncle would be back soon. Life in the city waited, whether I was ready or not. When I rose to pack my things, he stood as well, watching me with a quiet I couldn't quite read. We walked together through the village, the sand crunching softly beneath our steps, the sky stretching wide and endless above. At the edge of the road, where the dunes began to rise, I stopped. My bag felt heavy in my hand, though not half as heavy as my chest. I turned to him, unsure of what to say. Goodbye felt too small, too sharp. Anything else felt like a promise I wasn't sure I could make. He must have seen the conflict in my face, because he stepped closer, his expression softer than I had ever seen it. And then, without a word, he leaned in until his forehead rested gently against mine. The world went silent. The warmth of him, the steady weight of that simple gesture, said everything words couldn't. I closed my eyes and let myself stay there, breathing him in, memorizing the moment. When he pulled back, it wasn't far. His eyes held mine, steady, unflinching. "I didn't expect this," I whispered, my voice trembling. His lips curved into the faintest smile. "Neither did I." For a moment we simply stood there, the desert wind moving softly around us, carrying the scent of sand and sun. Then, slowly, he let my hand go. Not abruptly. Not as if he were finished with me. Just gently, with the kind of care that said this isn't an ending, only a pause. The driver's car appeared in the distance, a small dot growing larger against the horizon. My throat tightened, but I managed to smile. "I don't know what this is," I admitted. He nodded once, solemn, but his eyes were kind. "Then let it be whatever it becomes." The words settled deep inside me, anchoring themselves where I knew they would remain. When the car arrived, I climbed in, my hand pressed against the glass as we pulled away. He stood where I left him, tall against the desert sky, watching until I was out of sight. The road stretched long ahead of me, the dunes rolling endlessly beside us. I leaned back, closing my eyes, the warmth of his hand still lingering in mine, the echo of his voice still steady in my chest. I didn't expect it. I didn't ask for it. But I wouldn't undo it for anything.